Hello, this is Outlaw Bookseller, and I thought it was time for some literary fiction. There's going to be some genre fiction in this as well, or perhaps the boundary between the two, but even though my literary fiction video clips aren't watched by as many people, which is a shame, because I'm going to say to you now, if I pick literary fiction, it usually means there's something unusual about it, and it's usually the sort of literary fiction which would appeal to genre readers, so do consider looking at the authors and the books I talk about, because they're often outsiders and very unique and always well worth the read. So I'm just plugging those a bit there. So literary fiction, also talk about collecting and collections. As you see, I do a lot of collecting and collection stuff on the channel as well. And you know, the big question that you face is, are book collectors mad? Well, I'm going to address that today and talk about a book which I haven't actually finished it. I've nearly finished. I'm reading it at the moment. And this is this marvellous book called White Spines by Nicholas Royle, subtitled Confessions of a Book Collector. Now, what you'll notice about this, anybody who's a big fan of publishing books, fiction generally, will see the word Picador there. And of course, Picador is one of the great literary fiction imprints in the history of literature. But you'll notice that even though it looks like a Picador, it's got the right typefaces and what have you, the white spine, it's actually published by Salt, who are a great little publisher. They've even, on the back, made it look like a Picador, and there's Nicholas there, wearing his crazy shades. And I'm going to talk more about him and his work as well. And this is a great book, actually. Anybody who really loves books would love this. And it's hard to know where to begin because it's so bonkers. But Nicholas Royle, really good writer, who I really like, read several of his books. And he is a collector of Picador. He's the same age as me. We were born in the same year. And I first read his work in the sort of late 80s when he was published in Interzone, the science fiction magazine. So he got his career after a flying start, and he's done some great stuff. And I picked this up. This came out last year, and I've just read it now. And he keeps a meticulous record of the books he buys, when he bought them, whatever. He takes pictures of them on his phone, so he knows what he's got. And he's got a particular thing about collecting 1980s, 1970s, 1980s B format imprints. Now, a B format, of course, is a larger format book. Let me just get an A format out. I'm always on about A formats, I know, just so you know what I mean. So bear with me a second. Here's an A format edition of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, published by Pan. And there it is with a B format there. So it's the smaller format. Funnily enough, I picked that entirely at random. So I'm not a massive Douglas Adams fan, if I'm honest. But Pan were the overall imprint, and Picador were their B format literary imprint. Now, a quick bit of history. The B format was probably pretty much invented in America. And you used to get books in the 60s which were in a larger format, and people used to call them egghead things because they were literary books, they were serious books, rather than sort of A format pocket books. And then in the early 70s, a guy called Sonny Mater took over editorial directorship at Pan, and he started the Picador line. And this is one of the first Picadors I bought, and you used to go into bookshops in the 70s and 80s, and they'd have a spinner, a revolving stand. These are pretty much gone now. I'll show you a picture of one in a moment, which I took at a gas station near me a couple of years ago. So yeah, this is one of the first Picadors I bought, and you'd go in a bookshop and they always had these white spines, and you'd look for them because they were always fantastic. They were fiction and non-fiction. They were often books which in hardcover had come from avant-garde publishers like John Calder and Peter Owen, really good publishers, and they'd get licensed to Picador, and you know, they were a real thing. And even though Sonny Mater had launched a B format imprint prior to this in the 60s called Paladin, which was slightly narrower, that was all non-fiction, and it hadn't quite taken off in the same way. And Paladin eventually became part of Granada, Grafton, HarperCollins. And I've talked about Granada and Grafton in my recent Isaac Asimov's collection video. But Picador really broke the mould, and they set the standard. And in the UK, as they got more and more successful, other A format paperback publishers started getting a B format imprint and flipping their literary fiction and non-fiction into it to indicate to readers this was serious writing. The result was that by the late 80s, the A format was on the way out, which is a great shame. But as I say, they had a great cash in, and I'll show you some more examples. These are just a few. I've got quite a few of them, and they were great books. And this is another favourite of mine, One to Count Cadence by James Crumley, which is a later Picador from the 90s. This was Crumley's first novel. He mostly wrote crime novels. His first two crime novels are fantastic. After that, they sort of turn into like cocaine and big guns, and they get very boring. This is his first novel, which is about the sort of Korean War and Vietnam, and sort of two different types of outsiders there, one from a military family, the other who just doesn't want to be involved. And this is a really great book. It's out of print. If you never pick it up, do. It's fantastic. So that's another Picador. And I used to work for Pan. I ran the Pan bookshop in Bath for about 6 months in 1985. So I worked for them, and I've mentioned this in other contexts. They're a great company to work for. And something that I was told while I was working for them was that they were going to launch a imprint within Picador called Picador Classics. And that they started appearing in 87. It seemed like years, it seemed like years had passed the point of learning. It was very exciting. And I never liked them as much as they looked too much like Penguin Classics to me. And this is a Picador classic. Some selected writings of Anna Kavan, a really amazing writer. She was an English middle class garden designer, architect and heroin addict. And she wrote a wonderful science fiction novel called Ice. And this is My Madness, the selected writings. And I think this is about the only Picador classic I've got. I've read other books which are in the imprint. One of my favourites is Curzio Malaparte's The Skin, which I have in NYRB. This one is from 1990 and is selected by Brian Aldiss. So fantastic stuff. So there's 3 Picadors. So Nicholas is a Picador collector. He collects other things as well. He collects other B format imprints. He's a very, very well read guy and unbiased. Reads right across all genres. So going back to his book here. And through this he just goes around bookshops. He lists things. And it's just an endless litany of titles and authors, the circumstances in which he bought books. He intersperses them, because he's quite experimental, with scenes from his dreams, which usually relate to other writers and books. And either he made them up, it doesn't really matter. And also there's other bits where he sort of talks about things he's overheard in bookshops, conversations and what have you. And of course he's mostly haunting second-hand bookshops because, the books he's collecting, also they go out to print and what have you. And Picador as an imprint is actually, this year is its, 72, so that's, it's like sort of 50 years, it's his 50th anniversary this year. And what better way to celebrate that and to celebrate what we used to get from Picador by reading this, because it's not Picador. Because these days, Picador isn't much of an imprint at all. I'm really going to have a go at it now, because they lost their identity, it seemed to me, when they started publishing Helen Fielding, Bridget Jones's Diary. And of course, as more and more people got their B format imprints going in the 70s, 80s and 90s, they took the licenses to the books back. So things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was probably the best-selling Picador, and funnily enough didn't always have a white spine, it had an orange one, sort of burnt orange. That sort of, reverted and it became a Penguin. So, all the great things they licensed, they lost. And it's really weird. So there are still some good books in Picador, but they sort of changed the livery and it lost its identity. And these days Picador doesn't mean very much, even though there are still some good books in it, particularly the works of Howard Cunnell, I would say, are particularly good. And, they're doing some special editions of books they've published recently. They're bringing back American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis with the original cover. I've got a copy of it, but it's under my bed, so I can't show it to you. So they do have this, but I would say don't worry about all of that. Read this instead, because this is fantastic. But it does raise the question of, are collectors completely mad? Because what Nicholas does, he's not sort of going for that completist thing where he buys every Picador ever. He buys most of them. He admits a lot of them he's never going to read. He talks very, very well, or I should say writes very, very, very well about the sort of titles, the authors, the cover designs, the livery, what have you, the magic of it, and that's absolutely fantastic. But you know, there are points in it where he questions his own sanity, and you read about him sort of ending up with like 30 copies of Last Orders by Graham Swift. You know, I don't think I'd bother with a single one myself, but there you go. So it's utterly bonkers. So he's not a completist in that I must have every single Picador. There are some he leaves aside. He does some really good jokes about Cathy Lett, actually, and who obviously considers a lightweight, and he's probably right, I'm sure. And lots of anecdotes about other authors and people in publishing, and a lot of people I know, actually. I've never met him, actually. I'd like to, because I think he's a fantastic writer and has done some great work. So read this. It's completely bonkers, but it made me think about collecting, and you know, it's interesting, really, because I look at friends of mine who collect as well. My friend Jules Burt's got a channel, and Jules is I would say, is closer to being a completist. Most collectors I know are completists. They go for like a complete run of a series or complete run of an author. I'm sort of, you know, I'd say I'm more discerning. What I actually am is that I can't spend all that money. I haven't got all that space. And it's also the thing that, you know, I like to try and focus on the best. And as a teenager, I lived in a small cottage, I had a small bookcase, and I was very, very tough. I'd only keep things that were really good. And that's to do with my reading of science fiction. The sort of first people I read were people like Conan Doyle, Wells and Wyndham, and they were really good literary writers, you know. So when I moved on to my first Americans, people like Frank Herbert, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, they're really clunky, you know, and I thought, oh, I've got to get rid of these books. And of course you want them again. I'd give anything, almost within reason, for a mint copy of Robert Heinlein's I Will Fear No Evil with the skull cover in NEL. So once you start talking about minutiae, then the collecting thing starts to come out. And that's what Royle does in this. So it's really good fun. And just to talk about Nicholas a bit more, because obviously I'm digressing now, but this is freewheeling stuff. You know how it is here. This is Regicide, which broadly speaking is a kind of horror or fantasy novel, a dark fantasy novel. Boy meets girl, loses girl, goes in search of her. And it's got this wonderful denouement where the central character is walking through the city and things just get very, very strange. It's kind of psychogeography. If you can pick it up, do. It's a fantastic book. And it's really sort of brilliant. And something that Nicholas writes about in White Spines, he writes about inclusions where he buys books second hand and they've got things written in them by other people. Now this copy here is signed by him, is dedicated to somebody called Johnny, who then sold it on to a dealer who I got this from. So there you go. And he writes about things like people that have left little messages and leave bus tickets and what have you. And that's the thing. And you know, he sort of ends up collecting for inclusions, and other people do that as well. I know that's the thing. So, you know, there are collectors out there who buy books which have things written in them. I find that really strange, but I like a book to be pristine. I don't mind if the author's written in it, but I don't like anybody else to write in it, but I guess that's just me. Maybe I'm anal, who can say? So that's my pristine but signed copy of Regicide. And talking about collecting, say my friend Jules Burt, he collects anything with a number on it. Nicholas collects Picadors and other things, but not everything. He has multiple copies. He gives them to friends. He likes to have alternative cover designs as they changed over the years. He agonises about the changes in the, you know, the sort of publisher symbol at the bottom of the spine and what have you. While we're doing that, we'll have a quick look. I'll just show you, yeah, there you go. This is my Andy Warhol A to B and Back Again, which is one of my favourite books of all time. And I've had this since early 80s. Let's have a look. Published 75, third printing 1982. So I was 19 when I bought this. You can get this now in Penguin Modern Classics, but it's not called From A to B and Back Again. Instead, it's called The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, which is the subtitle of the book. The book is called From A to B and Back Again. So try and get an original if you can. And this is absolutely brilliant. I really recommend this. Very funny, very entertaining, very wise book. But going on to the collecting thing, digressing once more, even again, you know, you see that collectors are slightly mad, you know, and Nicholas is charmingly mad. But he writes about something in here which is one of my particular bugbears, to use an old word, as a bookseller, and that's detail. And, you know, every day of my job, people come to me and they ask for books. and they'll give me a title and an author if I'm lucky these days, because people have short attention spans. We're not so switched on as we were. We're always looking at our mobile phones and what have you, and we're not so good with detail. We get fuzzy because we rely on Wikipedia, the internet, what have you, and notes we've made. And so often when people give me a title and it contains a singular word, I think of a plural, because it's very rare that somebody gives me an exact title and an exact author name. And you need to be exact when searching for a book, because if the bookseller doesn't know it, they're going to look it up. And, you know, databases tend to go away from the fuzzy. Amazon's very fuzzy. A lot of bookshop databases are very exact. You have to have it to the letter, doesn't like short words, what have you. So with this in mind, there's an interesting thing here about Nicholas Royle, because there are actually two writers called Nicholas Royle. Now, I think I realised this some years ago, and then I forgot about it. And I definitely forgot about it recently, because Nicholas writes about it in here. And he writes about how, you know, the two of them, they're similar ages. The other Nicholas Royle is 6 years older. Now, this Nicholas Royle teaches creative writing. He's from Manchester. The other Nicholas Royle teaches, he teaches literature as well. And he teaches a bit more theoretically, I think. And he teaches at the University of West Sussex. And recently I bought the other Nicholas Royle's book, The Uncanny. And I mentioned this in a video the other day because I'd forgotten that they were two separate writers, because of course their names are exactly the same. And because this is about the uncanny, which suggests horror, the fantastic, what have you, and because the other Nicholas Royle, the one I'm reading at the moment, writes horror and the fantastic very often, you get them confused. Now, people say to me, Steve, on your books, everybody calls you Steve, but why do your books have Stephen E. Andrews on them instead of Steve Andrews? Well, I'll tell you why. Even before the internet, I realised there were lots and lots of people in the world called Steve Andrews. There was a chap in Cardiff, and I think he's still around, who was a singer. He used to do gigs around, you know, the pubs in Cardiff, and he was called Steve Andrews. And one of my girlfriends back in the 80s said, there was a poster up with your name on it in Cardiff. I didn't realise you were doing this. And of course, it wasn't me. I saw a letter in an issue of Werewolf by Night, the Marvel comic, from somebody in America called Steve Andrews. I saw a letter in, I think, one of the newspapers in South Wales about toads from somebody called Steve Andrews. And I was interested in amphibians, but it wasn't me. So, you know, you can have a really uncommon name. There's lots of other people out there with the same name. So if you Google Steve Andrews, you get loads of people. Now, as I'm a bookseller, as I wanted to sell copies of my books, I wanted to have a specific name that separated me out from other authors who might have the same name. So I went with Stephen, my full name, E, my initial, and Andrews, so Stephen E. Andrews. Now, I'm the only Stephen E. Andrews out there, I think, as a writer, so there shouldn't be any confusion. Makes it easier for booksellers, easier for publishers, and it sounds a bit like Philip K. Dick, which is cool. So, you know, that was another reason. But Nicholas, of course, and the other Nicholas Royle, let's hold up their books together and confuse matters even more. They've stuck with it. Now, if that were me, I'd have been on the phone to my publisher and said, you know, from now on, you know, I'm changing my name. I'm going to stick an initial in, what have you. You know, I'll come up with a good pseudonym. But Nicholas writes about the various people and the problems they've had because of this. There's Conrad Williams, who's a horror writer. There's a literary writer called Conrad Williams. There's a horror writer called John Saul in America. There's a British literary writer called John Saul, and I think there's two Robert Stones. That's really confusing. And the funny thing is both I and a friend of mine who I work with read another novel by this Nicholas Royle a few years ago called First Novel, which is fantastic, and it's published by Jonathan Cape, one of my favourite imprints of all time. And as you see on the cover, it looks like Picadors. They're all Picadors, okay? Except they say Cape on them because this book is published by Cape. It looks like Picadors. So, you know, there's a lot of literary game playing going on here, Nicholas. And basically, this is a fantastic novel, and the best novels I've read in recent years. It's very funny, very original, very witty. And the guy in it is a Picador collector, amongst other things. And First Novel actually wasn't Nicholas's first novel at all. It was about his sixth. He's written about 7. In fact, Regicide, I think, comes from round about the same time as First Novel. And it's great. And I'll just read what it says in the flap here. Either first novel is a darkly funny examination of the relative attractions of creative writing courses and suburban dogging sites. I kid you not, this is a book about creative writing and dogging. Or it's a twisted campus novel and possible murder mystery that's not afraid to blend fact with fiction in its exploration of the nature of identity. Paul Kinder, a novelist with one forgotten book to his name, teaches creative writing in a university of the northwest of England. Now, of course, Nicholas Royle, teaches creative writing in the north of England. Either he's researching his second breakthrough novel or he's killing time having sex in cars. Now, I'm not saying that this Nicholas Royle is dogging, so let's not go there. But this is fantastic. It's got an elliptical structure, it loops on itself, it's very witty, it's very clever, it's fresh and original. The kind of things I don't find myself saying about literary fiction a lot. And I love this, and I think it's fantastic. It didn't do that well, unfortunately. It's print on demand in paperback, which means that you don't walk into a bookshop, pick it up, you've got to order it, and they print one specially, and it's $12.99 instead of $8.99. So it's ridiculous, So it needs to be a proper pile of papers, really, really good, possibly too self-referential and clever. And yet it doesn't feel like a postmodern book. It feels referential to other things, but it doesn't have that feel of eclectic postmodernism. It is really good. So do read first novel. It's fantastic. So there's the confusion about the Nicholases and the craziness of collectors, and you just fall down a rabbit hole with these things, and this is part of the wonderful madness of books and book collecting. So if you love books and you like Picadors particularly, do read White Spines. It's absolutely fantastic. Do read first novel. It's brilliant. If you can pick up a copy of Regicide, do read that as well. It's great. And this Nicholas, this one, he is sort of series editor for an anthology called Best British Short Stories, which has run for years and years and years. And he's the editor of that, and he puts all sorts of wonderful things in. So if you want to keep up with what's happening in the short story, and he's very fond of short stories, and he writes very good ones, I would say, go for that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to sort of take the rest of the day off from filming. I'm going to finish reading White Spines. And then because I'm doing a lot of stuff at the moment about psychogeography, hauntology, folk horror, what have you, I'm going to read this Nicholas Royle's The Uncanny. And going back to what I was going to say earlier on was, a friend of mine and I both read first novel by the other Nicholas Royle. And then we read a book which came out that we thought was by this Nicholas Royle. I know I keep doing that, but it's the only way to keep it straight. Use an initial, one of you, for God's sake. And basically, it was a book called The Englishman's Guide to Bird Watching. And it's a very strange book about a couple who are beset by gulls. And it's got this very avant-garde end section. It's quite good, but I don't think either me or my friend liked it as much as first novel, but we thought it was the same writer. But I am going to go back to it, and it's interesting because this Nicholas Royle, once more, did a collection called Ornithology, which is like sort of fantasy and horror stories about birds. And yet the other Nicholas Royle, the one who wrote The Uncanny, did this book called Englishman's Guide to Bird Watching. It's just bizarre. So guys, please sort yourself out. It's a bit much for a bookseller when they're trying to sort of get clarity there and you're not putting the detail in. Please put the detail in. So Nicholas Royle and Nicholas Royle, you've both driven me mad. You've both entertained me, and I do recommend both your books. So thanks for that. And thanks to you for watching this rather rambling thing, which rather shows that the irrational is there in book selling and collecting. I'd like to try and keep it rational, keep it detailed and keep it exact, but sometimes there's nothing you can do with these authors who won't use initials and don't think about these things. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Bye.